The storm had already swallowed the horizon, and I set foot on the jagged rock that now carried me. The waves slammed against the cliffs like cannon fire, spraying salt into the air, and the wind tore at my jacket, as if it wanted to rip me apart piece by piece. This was no welcoming place, but maybe that's why I came, because I was just as broken and unwanted as the island itself. My name is Jonas Keene, a veteran who left too many scars behind on the battlefield. I came here with nothing but two companions who refused to abandon me. Atlas, a German shepherd with eyes sharp as steel, and Luna, a husky, whose mournful howl can cut through any silence. They are my shadow, my family, and though I did not know it yet, their instincts would lead me to a secret buried deep inside these stones. That first night, as I sat by the old fireplace, trying to believe this ruin could become a home, Atlas began to scratch furiously at the hearth, while Luna threw her head back and howled as if warning the sea itself. My hands froze. What did they sense beneath the stone that I could not? What danger or truth was hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? Could it be that my inheritance, the worthless rock everyone mocked, was more than it seemed? Could two dogs know what even a soldier trained to survive could not? The answer would not just surprise me, it would change everything. So stay with me. Today join me, Atlas and Luna, as we uncover what lies hidden beneath this desolate rock. And if you want more stories of loyalty and discovery, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what comes next. When I think back to that night on the island, the storm, the fireplace, the way Atlas clawed at the stone, and Luna howled as if her soul could hear something buried below, I realize the story doesn't begin there. It begins in a room suffocating with wealth and bitterness, far from the wild edge of the sea. Before I ever stepped onto that jagged rock, I sat across from a lawyer whose office smelled of lemon polish and paper so old it had forgotten its purpose. That room, polished and proper, was the cage that set me free. The reading of my grandfather's will was supposed to be simple. A list of numbers and assets, signatures, nods of approval, maybe even a toast. I had walked into that office with nothing but the weight of my past on my shoulders, and two loyal dogs waiting outside in the truck. Atlas sat stiff as a soldier, Luna curled beside him, her blue eyes tracking every passerby, as if she knew the world owed us nothing but suspicion. I told them I wouldn't be long, though. Deep down, I already knew I didn't belong inside that office of leather and glass. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looked like he'd been carved from parchment and dried in the sun, every wrinkle a brittle line of old secrets. He adjusted his glasses and started droning on, his voice a whisper of dust. To my cousin Eric went the houses, the shares, the fortune. Every word added weight to Eric's smug smile. He was 5 years younger, heavier in body, but lighter in character. His suit was expensive but pinched tight at the waist, as if money could hide greed but not gluttony. He tapped his fingers on the table, each tap like a hammer on my nerves, reminding me that I was an intruder in my own bloodline. I sat straight, the way years of service had drilled into me. To the untrained eye, I might have looked calm, but my body was coiled steel. I marked every exit, weighed every glass ornament in the room, measured the tremor in Eric's leg that betrayed his eagerness to claim what wasn't his. I wasn't there for money. I wasn't even sure why I had come. Maybe because in some foolish corner of my mind, I thought my grandfather might have left a word, a sign that he remembered me after all these years. When the lawyer's voice finally shifted, I felt it in my gut before I heard the words. And to my grandson Jonas Keene, Eric chuckled before the sentence was even finished, already preparing to mock whatever scrap might fall from the table. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. I leave Seawolf Ledge, my house upon it, and everything within. I also leave to his care my loyal companions, Atlas and Luna. The silence was so sharp, I could hear the ticking of the brass clock on the wall. Then Eric laughed loud, cruel, echoing off the mahogany panels. A worthless piece of rock and 2 mutts, he sneered. The old man must have lost his mind at the end. His words stung not because of their truth, but because of their intent. To him everything had a price, and anything without value on paper was worthless. He didn't see the loyalty of dogs or the solitude of a jagged island as gifts. He saw them as punishment. But I heard something else. My grandfather's words had a weight I couldn't ignore. Everything within. The phrase lingered in my chest like a riddle. Why give me an island? Why entrust me with Atlas and Luna, if not for a reason deeper than land and stone? I remembered fragments of him from my childhood. A calloused hand on my shoulder, the smell of salt and engine oil, a voice rough as gravel. He hadn't been sentimental, but he hadn't been careless either. If he left me the island, he meant something by it. Eric leaned across the table, his cologne sharp enough to choke me. Maybe there's treasure buried out there, he said with a grin. Better start digging, soldier. It's all you've got. His words were meant to cut, but I didn't bite. I'd been through too many interrogations, too many nights where the wrong reaction meant the end of someone's life. I kept my eyes steady, my voice silent. He mistook that silence for weakness. Mr. Sterling closed the will and folded his hands. His eyes, ancient but not unkind, lingered on me longer than on Eric. Your grandfather was deliberate, he said quietly. Not sentimental, but deliberate. He left provisions for the upkeep of the island. Modest, but enough to live. And he made sure the dogs would be cared for until you arrived. His words settled over me like a quiet command. I wasn't just inheriting a house on a rock. I was inheriting a responsibility. When I walked out of that office, Eric's laughter still clinging to the air. Atlas pressed his massive frame against my leg, and Luna's husky howl rose soft and low, as if she sensed the storm already gathering. I placed my hand on their heads, and for the first time in years, I felt anchored. But the car ride north wasn't quiet. Eric had left me with more than mockery. His greed was a shadow, one I knew would follow me to that island. He couldn't stand the idea that I had been chosen for something he didn't understand. He had always seen me as the broken one, the cousin who traded fortune for a uniform bloodline for battlefield. To him, Seawolf Ledge was an insult, and insults demanded repayment. As the miles stretched between the city and the coast, I thought of the past that had carved us so differently. Eric had grown fat on ease and entitlement, while I had learned discipline from the silence of desert nights and the sharp crack of gunfire. Where he measured worth in dollars, I measured it in lives saved and promises kept. And now we were bound again by the will of a man neither of us truly knew, but both of us could not escape. The further I drove, the more I understood the gift disguised as insult. That worthless rock, mocked and dismissed, was the first place in years where I felt the possibility of peace. But peace I knew would not come without a fight. The seeds of conflict had been planted in that suffocating office, watered by Eric's greed and my grandfather's riddle. And so when I finally stood on Seawolf Ledge, with Atlas at my side, and Luna howling into the storm, I understood the weight of what had begun that day. This was not just an inheritance. It was a battleground drawn not in sand or soil but in blood and stone. The laughter of my cousin still echoed in my ears, but it only steeled my resolve. Whatever was hidden within that rock, whatever truth my grandfather had left for me to uncover, I knew one thing for certain: Eric would come for it. And when he did, he would find not the broken soldier he mocked, but a man with 2 loyal sentinels and nothing left to lose. That was the moment the war shifted. Not the wars I had fought overseas, but the war within my own bloodline. The day Eric claimed his fortune was the day I inherited a burden disguised as a curse, but in truth it was a purpose. The courtroom was not the end of my family's story. It was the spark that lit the fire. And as I left behind the city's polished cage for the salt-stained cliffs of the Atlantic, I carried that fire with me, knowing it would one day meet the storm head-on. The road north felt endless, though the miles peeled away beneath the tires of my old truck like pages torn from a book I'd already read. Atlas kept his head high in the back seat, amber eyes fixed on the passing blur of trees, and Towns always alert, always steady. Luna curled beside him, her thick fur rising and falling with the rhythm of her breath, occasionally lifting her muzzle to let out a quiet sigh or a low, restless whine. They seemed to know we were moving towards something that would change everything. I didn't tell them, but I felt it too. Every town I passed seemed smaller than the last, the buildings leaning tiredly against each other, the signs fading from years of sun and salt. Gas stations gave way to bait shops, diners to weathered bars with names painted in peeling letters. The air grew sharper, tasting of pine and the cold bite of the ocean even before I could see the water. It was as if the land itself was pushing me toward the edge of the world. By the time I reached the coastal town of Port Clyde, dusk had settled like a damp shroud over the harbor. Fishing boats rocked in their moorings, their masts creaking, gulls circling with harsh cries that sounded more like warnings than greetings. The smell hit me first, salt diesel, and the raw, briny rot of seaweed piled along the docks. It was a smell that clawed its way into your lungs and stayed there, reminding you that you were only a guest in this place, and the sea could send you home or swallow you whole. I found Jed exactly where the lawyer's directions said he'd be, at the end of a weathered pier, mending a net beneath the weak glow of a single bulb. He looked like he'd been carved from driftwood, his face scored with lines deeper than the grooves in the planks under our feet. His sweater was thick and oil-stained, his hands moving with the quiet certainty of a man who had done the same work longer than I'd been alive. "You must be keen," he said without looking up, his voice a low rumble like stones shifting under the tide. There was no warmth in it, but no hostility either. Jonas the First corrected gently, extending a hand. He glanced at it, wiped his on his trousers, then shook mine with a surprising strength. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said after a pause. "Kept to himself. Fair." His pale blue eyes studied me, assessing, measuring. "Let's get you out to the ledge." At the end of the pier sat a small motorboat, its paint chipped and faded, its hull scarred from countless encounters with rocks and storms. It looked battered but solid, the kind of vessel built to endure rather than impress. In the stern, as still as carved stone, sat Atlas and Luna. I hadn't realized Jed had already ferried them from the truck. Atlas's ears pricked as I approached, his gaze locked on me, as if waiting for confirmation that this strange man was to be trusted. Luna's pale eyes reflected the glow of the bulb, and for a moment she looked otherworldly. Jed gave a small nod toward them. "They've been waiting. Like they knew you were coming." I crouched at the edge of the boat, meeting Atlas's steady stare first. "I'm here," I whispered. His nose twitched, and after a beat, he pressed his muzzle to my hand, his tail giving a single thump against the hull. Luna leaned into me, next, her fur damp with sea mist, her breath warm against my palm. I felt a current pass between us, not of electricity, but of trust. In that instant, I knew this island wouldn't be mine alone. It would be ours. Jed climbed in first, started the engine with a cough of black smoke, and gestured for me to follow. I settled in my bag at my feet, my dogs flanking me like sentinels. The boat chugged away from the dock, leaving the weak glow of town lights behind, trading them for the vast looming dark of the open Atlantic. The farther we went, the more the sea revealed its true face. The water wasn't just blue or gray, it was alive, shifting, heaving, rolling, with a power that dwarfed anything man could build. The wind carried a sharp bite, and spray stung my cheeks like needles. Atlas braced himself at the bow, his stance unyielding, while Luna pressed against my side, her fur a shield against the cold. I envied their certainty. For me, every wave felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. After 20 minutes, it appeared Seawolf Ledge, a jagged tooth of granite rising from the slate-gray water, black against the horizon, defiant and unwelcoming. Perched at its highest point was a house, small and crooked, as if one strong gust might tip it back into the sea. Eric's mocking laugh echoed in my mind, a worthless piece of rock and 2 mutts. Yet even from a distance I felt something he never could have pulled, a gravity that told me this place mattered even if I didn't yet know why. Jed guided the boat into a small cove marked on the map, cut the engine, and let us drift the last few feet. The hull scraped stone, and silence fell thick, absolute, broken only by the crash of waves on the far side of the rock. "This is it," Jed said simply. He handed me the rope, his grip firm. "The ledge is a hard place. It takes more than it gives, But your grandfather saw something out here. Maybe you will too. He gave Atlas and Luna a final nod, as if recognizing soldiers on a post, then steered the boat back into the dark. Within minutes the engine was gone, and we were alone. Atlas leapt first, landing solidly on the slick stone. Luna followed her Paws, finding purchase with surprising ease. I climbed last my boots, slipping on the wet granite, my breath ragged with the climb toward the house. The wind howled sharp and cold, biting through my jacket, carrying the taste of salt. Up close, the house was worse than I'd imagined. The wood was bleached gray and splintered windows clouded with salt spray. One shutter hanging from a single hinge, banging a mournful rhythm in the wind. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a space filled with the smell of damp disuse and the sea itself. It wasn't a home. It was a tomb. The weight of despair settled heavy on my chest. What was I doing here, Eric? Had been right, it was worthless. A ruin, a punishment, a reminder of everything I'd lost. My knees buckled as I dropped my bag, and for a moment, I wanted to walk back down, wait for Jed, and beg him to take me anywhere else. Then I felt it. A warm, solid pressure against my leg. Atlas stood beside me, pressed close, his eyes unwavering. On the other side, Luna leaned her head into my hip, her breath steady and grounding. Their presence cut through the fog of despair. This wasn't just a house. It was shelter. And I wasn't alone. I drew a breath, filling my lungs with salt air that burned but steadied me. "All right," I said softly. "Let's get to work." Days bled into weeks, and a rhythm took shape. Mornings began with Atlas nudging me awake, his cold nose insistent against my hand, while Luna's howl rose with the dawn like a prayer. We patrolled the perimeter together, a man and two dogs walking the edge of their kingdom. Atlas's ears swiveled at every sound, carried on the wind, his gaze scanning the horizon. Luna padded lightly beside me, her sharp instincts catching what mine missed. The house demanded constant attention. I replaced rotten planks, rehung the crooked shutter, scraped salt crust from the windows until daylight finally pierced the gloom. Every swing of the hammer was an act of defiance. Every turn of the screwdriver, a claim staked against the sea. When frustration mounted, Atlas would rest his heavy head on my knee, grounding me. When loneliness crept in at dusk, Luna would push a worn piece of rope she'd found into my hand, her eyes gleaming with mischief until I laughed. Fishing became our lifeline. I found my grandfather's rods and tackle box cast lines into the restless sea, with Atlas standing sentinel and Luna sprawled at my feet. The rhythm of the waves, the tug of the line, the shared meal of fire-roasted fish under a canopy of stars. It was a peace I hadn't known in years. For a soldier haunted by ghosts, it was therapy in its purest form. Slowly, the panic attacks that once ambushed me lost their grip. The silence here wasn't an enemy. It was medicine. Atlas and Luna became more than dogs. They became partners, comrades, guardians of a post no one else would ever see. Together, we held the line on that forsaken ledge. Yet beneath the peace was a whisper, a secret pulsing in the granite itself. I saw it in Atlas's alert stance, in Luna's restless howls, on nights when the sea roared louder than usual. They knew something I didn't. And though I didn't yet understand it, I could feel it, the truth buried beneath stone, waiting for us to uncover it. It was one of those nights when the sea refused to rest, its voice rising and falling, like the breath of some great beast, pacing just beyond the horizon. I had lit a fire in the old stone hearth, its flames clawing weakly at the damp air inside the cabin. Atlas sprawled in front of it, eyes half closed, but ears twitching at every sound. Luna lay beside him, her head tilted, nose twitching as if catching scents carried through the cracks in the stone itself. I sat in the armchair. My grandfather must have once claimed a journal open in my lap, the flickering light staining the pages amber. I had found the journals in a sea chest, buried beneath dust in the corner of the cabin. At first I thought they were nothing but the ramblings of a lonely old man. But as I read, I began to see patterns, tidal charts, sketches of bird migrations, notations about vibrations in the granite. He wrote of the ocean as if it were alive, singing songs that only he could hear. At first I thought it was metaphor, the whimsy of solitude. But the precision of his handwriting told another story. My grandfather hadn't been wasting his years out here. He had been studying something, listening to something hidden in the bones of this rock. Atlas stirred suddenly, lifting his head from his paws. He moved to the hearth nose, pressed against the slab of granite forming its base. He sniffed, then scratched one's claws, grating sharply against stone. I frowned, closing the journal. "Easy, boy," I muttered, thinking he'd caught a mouse. But he ignored me, scratching again more urgently this time. Luna rose beside him, her body tense. And then she did something I had never heard before. She threw her head back and let out a long, mournful howl. Not playful, not conversational, but a raw note of warning that made the hair rise on my arms. I set the journal aside and knelt beside them, running a hand over the stone. It was solid, cold, seamless with the floor. "There's nothing here," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew I was wrong. Atlas looked back at me, amber eyes burning with insistence. He pressed his muzzle into my hand, then pushed me toward the slab, whining low in his throat. Luna circled behind us, her eyes fixed on the same spot, her body rigid with focus. I remembered nights overseas when the tracker dogs would freeze ears back, refusing to step forward, because they sensed what we could not mines, buried in sand traps, hidden in shadows. Their instincts had saved us more times than I could count. Trust the dogs. That lesson had been carved into me with fire and blood. "All right," I said, finally gripping the edge of the slab with my fingertips. I pressed hard, and to my shock I felt it shift a fraction, almost imperceptible, but enough. My heart hammered. I fetched the crowbar I'd used, repairing the porch, wedged its tip into the seam and heaved. The stone groaned like a living thing, lifting inch by inch until the dark mouth of a hollow space yawned beneath it. A breath of cool, dry air rose from below, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of secrets long buried. Atlas growled low, not with fear, but with confirmation. Luna pressed her nose toward the opening ears, flattened tail stiff. I lowered the crowbar and reached inside. My fingers brushed against something wrapped in oilcloth and something else heavy and metallic. I pulled them out and laid them on the floor. The first was another journal, perfectly preserved. The second was an object that caught the firelight, a piece of brass, solid, heavy, cut with grooves and notches that looked more like machinery than any key I'd ever seen. I unwrapped the journal and opened it. The handwriting was the same, but the words carried a different weight. "My name is Julian Keene," it began, "and in 1974 I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy, where I served as an acoustic engineer on the Sound Surveillance System project." The letters blurred for a moment as my mind struggled to catch up. Acoustic engineer, sound surveillance. Suddenly the title charts, the vibrations, the songs of the ocean weren't the ramblings of a lonely old man. They were data. He hadn't been dreaming, he had been working. The journal was no diary. It was a confession, a record, a blueprint. He wrote of discovering that Seawolf Ledge was a geological anomaly. Its granite so dense and unique, it acted like a natural amplifier, focusing the faintest sounds of the deep ocean. To the Navy it had been a weapon, a way to track submarines, to turn listening into hunting. But to my grandfather it had been something else, a shield, a way to guard, not to kill. When they ignored him, he had walked away, burying his research in stone and silence. I stared at the strange brass key lying on the hearth. His words described a chamber carved into the rock, powered by tidal energy, hidden beneath the seaweed and waves. That key was no symbol. It was a tool, a way in. I leaned back against the chair, my breath coming fast. Atlas pressed his head into my shoulder, and Luna whined softly. Her eyes locked on me as if to ask, "Do you understand now?" The storm outside raged harder, rattling the windows, shaking the walls. The cabin groaned under the weight of wind and water, but inside a different storm gathered. My grandfather hadn't left me an island to rot. He had left me a responsibility. The phrase from his will echoed in my mind, sharp as a blade. Everything within. I couldn't sleep. The night stretched on the journal open. Across my knees pages, filled with diagrams of turbines hidden in tidal channels, power drawn from the eternal rhythm of the sea, schematics for doors cut into granite and sealed with precision. engineering. At the bottom of one page, in letters darker and sharper than the rest, he had written, "The watch is now yours." By dawn, I knew I couldn't wait. The next low tide was approaching, and the instructions in his coded notes pointed to a place he called the Trident. 3 jagged rocks, draped in kelp on the far side of the ledge. I packed a rope, a flashlight, and the brass key into my jacket. Atlas and Luna paced restlessly, their eyes bright, bodies taut with anticipation. They knew maybe better than I did that the time had come. The tide receded fast, pulling back to reveal the slick black skeleton of the ledge. The 3 of us moved across it, careful, deliberate. The kelp clung to my boots, wet and slimy, but the dogs pressed forward with steady purpose. We reached the central prong of the Trident, a sheer wall of granite draped in curtains of seaweed. It looked impenetrable. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. Had I misread the codes? Was this nothing more than the madness of an old man? Then Luna stopped, nose pressed to the rock, a sharp bark breaking the roar of the surf. Atlas joined her paw, scraping at a section indistinguishable from the rest. I pulled the seaweed aside, and there it was, a small, circular indentation carved into the stone, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. My hands shook as I drew the brass key from my pocket. The grooves matched perfectly. I slid it in and twisted. The rock shuddered, a deep, grinding rumble rising from its bones, and a line appeared, a seam glowing faint with reflected light. Slowly, impossibly, a door of granite began to slide inward, revealing a dark tunnel cut into the heart of the ledge. Atlas pressed close against me, muscles tight, while Luna's howl rose again, not of fear, but of recognition, as if announcing that the secret of generations had finally been found. I stepped forward, the beam of my flashlight cutting into the black. The air that poured out was cool, dry, carrying the faint smell of metal and dormant machinery. I looked back once at the sea, the waves crashing against the cliffs, the storm pressing on. Then I looked at my dogs, their eyes steady, waiting. "All right," I whispered. "Let's see what he left us." And together we crossed the threshold into the darkness, stepping not just into stone, but into the truth my grandfather had hidden all his life. The tunnel swallowed us whole, silence pressing in so thick it felt alive. My flashlight's beam cut a narrow cone through the darkness, sliding over walls that weren't raw rock, but smooth surfaces lined with some kind of material that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. Atlas padded ahead, steady, confident, every muscle taut with readiness. Luna stayed close to my side, her ears swiveling at every faint echo, her breath puffing white in the cool, stale air. Step by step, we descended deeper into the secret my grandfather had buried in this island. At the end of the passage loomed a heavy metal door, the kind I had seen on naval ships, complete with a circular wheel in its center. I gripped it with both hands, twisted, and felt it give without protest, as though waiting decades just for me. The hiss of equalized air escaped, and then the door swung inward to reveal a chamber that stopped me cold. The place was enormous, carved directly into the granite, yet pristine, preserved by the airtight seal. Consoles lined the walls, banks of servers blinked with dormant lights, and a curved screen stretched across the far wall like the eye of some slumbering giant. It was a cathedral of machines, a monument to silence and listening. I followed the instructions in the journal, step by step, bringing the system back to life. The tidal generators groaned awake, a hum rising through the floor, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. Lights flickered to green, the air stirred with the whisper of fans, and finally the screen lit up. Colors and shapes danced across it, a living map of sound. The deep thrum of cargo ships appeared as ribbons of purple dolphins, chattered as streaks of blue, and the crackle of shrimp beds shimmered in pale green clouds. My grandfather hadn't been chasing madness. He had built a way to hear the ocean breathe. Atlas sat at attention, his gaze fixed on the glowing screen, as if he too understood the gravity of what we were witnessing. Luna pressed against me, her howl low and steady, not of fear but recognition. I felt the words from the journal echo in me, "The watch is now yours." For a while I forgot the world outside. I forgot Eric, the family that mocked me, the years I had lost. But the world doesn't forget you. It comes knocking always, and it came for me in the sound of an engine slicing across the waves above. Atlas growled first, head snapping toward the ceiling, muscles bristling. Luna gave a sharp bark, her body tense. I froze, listening. Through the hum of the machines I caught it too, the high whine of a motor, too sleek, too powerful to be a fishing boat. I ran back up the tunnel, pressed my ear to the heavy slab of stone at the entrance, and heard voices carried faintly by the wind. Eric. I knew that arrogant tone anywhere, slick with false charm and greed. I heard the splash of a dinghy hitting the rock, the grunts of men climbing. 3 of them at least. Eric didn't come alone. My stomach tightened. I had expected this, but not so soon. He couldn't stand the idea that I had something he didn't, even if he didn't understand it. He had come to claim what he believed was his. I sealed the door and descended back into the station, heart pounding. On the screen, the ocean symphony danced, but amid the beauty, something darker pulsed. A small, dense signal moved deliberately through the chaos of the storm building outside. A submarine, or maybe a submersible, creeping closer. Eric wasn't just driven by his own greed. He had partners. Investors, he'd called them once. Foreign, hungry, ruthless. The storm struck, not long after hammering the island with rain and wind, so fierce it felt like the sea itself was trying to erase us. The shack above groaned under the assault waves, pounding it until timbers splintered. I barely made it back through the hearth passage, when the front door shattered inward, and Eric stumbled inside, drenched, his slick jacket clinging to his soft frame. 2 men followed him, one wiry and twitchy, the other a hulking brute with fists like cinder blocks. Well, Cousin Eric said, water dripping from his hair, his smile stretched thin with desperation. Looks like the tide has turned. Atlas stood between us before I could move, his growl, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Luna flanked him, hackles raised, teeth bared. The big man, Rook, as I later learned his name, shifted nervously, his eyes flicking toward the dogs. Call them off, Eric snapped. We're family. You should remember that, before you sold us out, I said, my voice steady, calm. Years of training left me cold in the face of threat. You don't know what you're playing with. On the contrary, he sneered, I know exactly what's here. Grandfather poured a fortune into this rock, and you think I'd let a broken soldier and 2 mutts keep it from me? No. I've got buyers, Jonas. Men who'll pay more than you've ever dreamed. They're already on their way. His words hit me like a blow. The submersible I had seen wasn't coincidence. It was his doing. He was about to hand over my grandfather's legacy, the shield he had built to predators who saw nothing but a weapon. The house shuddered violently as another wave struck a window, exploding inward, spraying salt water across the room. Luna howled long and sharp, her voice cutting through the storm. Atlas barked once, sharp as a gunshot. I knew what they meant. The house wouldn't hold. The only safe place was below. I moved fast, dragging the hearth slab open. The hidden passage yawned, dark and wide. In here, if you want to live, I ordered. Eric recoiled. I'm not crawling into some hole like a rat. Rook shoved him forward. We don't have a choice, he grunted, his voice rough. The wiry one, Finn, was already scrambling in his nerves, stretched to breaking. Eric hesitated only a moment longer before another wave hit, tearing half the roof away with a deafening crack. His arrogance crumbled into fear, and he dove after them. Atlas leapt in next, Luna at his side, and I followed last, pulling the slab shut behind me as the shack above gave its final groan and collapsed into the sea. We descended into the station, the storm silenced by the heavy door. The glow of the screen lit the chamber, casting green light across Eric's pale face. His smirk was gone, replaced by awe and terror. What is this place?" he whispered. "The truth," I said, brushing past him. My hands flew across the console, pulling up the signal again. The submersible was closing fast, using the storm as cover. "And the men you're so eager to sell it to are nearly here." His face twisted, greed battling fear. "Then show them. Prove its worth. We'll all be rich." "You don't get it," I snapped. "This isn't about profit. It's about protection. Grandfather built this to guard, not to kill. And you're about to hand it to vultures." Atlas growled again, his gaze fixed on Eric, as if he understood every word. Luna pressed against my leg, her body trembling with anticipation. On the screen, the hostile signal pulsed closer, the predator in the deep drawing near. Above us, the storm raged. Around us, the sea churned. Inside me, the choice crystallized. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance. I was fighting for my grandfather's legacy, for the silent watch he had passed to me, for the two companions who had led me to this truth. Eric thought this was a game of wealth. He had no idea it was a war. And I knew with absolute clarity that when the storm cleared, only one of us would walk away with the watch. The chamber vibrated under the force of the storm, above a deep thrumming that traveled through the stone and into my bones. The screen before me glowed with the pulsing rhythm of the ocean, a living map of sound and movement. The hostile signal moved closer, threading its way through the storm-darkened waters like a predator sniffing blood. Atlas stood rigid beside me, muscles tight, teeth bared in silence. Luna pressed against my leg, her eyes reflecting the green light of the monitors. Her body trembled. Eric paced like a cornered animal, his damp hair plastered to his forehead, his arrogance shredded into raw desperation. "Jonas," he pleaded, though the word tasted bitter from his mouth, "you don't have to fight this alone. Those men out there, they'll come whether you like it or not. Let me talk to them." Cudadia, I turned to him, my jaw tight. "You still don't get it. This isn't a game of winning. This is about survival, about honor. Grandfather didn't build this place for greed. He built it for guardianship. And now you want to sell it like scrap at auction." Rook shifted uncomfortably in the shadows, his massive arms crossed. Finn fidgeted, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cold. They weren't loyal to Eric. They were loyal to money. And money had a way of shifting sides when storms closed in. Another tremor rippled through the chamber. The signal on the screen surged closer, steady and deliberate. I recognized the pattern now, not a submarine from our Navy, but something foreign, something built to be silent, yet amplified by the storm's cloak. It wasn't here by chance. Eric had invited it. "You called them," I said flatly. Eric's lips twitched, his eyes darting to the floor. "I told them there was something worth buying." I didn't think. Atlas barked once, sharp and accusing, cutting him off. Luna growled low as if echoing the truth I already knew. "You didn't think," I repeated. "And now we all pay the price." I moved to the central console, hands steady, as I activated the defensive protocols outlined in my grandfather's journal. A low hum spread through the chamber as turbines far beneath us spun awake, drawing power from the raging tide. The screen shifted, overlaying grids and arcs across the sonar display. We weren't just listening anymore. We were tracking, preparing, guarding. The station's voice, mechanical but calm, crackled through an old speaker. "Silent watch operational." The weight of those words pressed into me like a mantle sliding onto my shoulders. My grandfather's legacy was no longer buried. It was alive, and now it was mine. Eric lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Don't shut them out. They'll kill us if we don't cooperate." I shook him off, my voice cold as steel. "They'll kill us if we do." Atlas leapt between us, a living wall of muscle and fury, his teeth inches from Eric's throat. The coward froze, his bravado collapsing into trembling silence. Luna circled behind him, her low growl, promising that betrayal would no longer go unanswered. I refocused on the screen. The hostile vessel was close now, its engine signature betraying its intent. Through the storm above, I could faintly hear another sound. The whine of helicopters, the sharp crack of thunder drowned by the roar of approaching blades. Help was coming, but too slow. It was on me to hold the line. I activated the external sensors, and the station's hidden hydrophones stretched their reach farther, mapping not only the intruder, but the full scope of the sea around us. The picture was clear. The vessel was preparing to deploy something, drones perhaps, or charges designed to breach. "Atlas," I whispered, and he shifted closer, eyes locked on me, steady as a comrade. "Luna." She pressed her head against my leg, her howl rising once, cutting through the hum of machinery. I made my choice. The turbines roared, surging with the force of the storm-fed tide. Energy coursed through conduits carved into the granite decades ago, built by hands that had known exactly what they were preparing for. I directed the power into a defensive pulse, a blast of sound so deep and resonant It shook the chamber itself. The hostile signal faltered, staggered, then recoiled, as if struck by an unseen fist. On the screen, it veered sharply off course, fleeing from the amplified roar of the earth itself. The silent watch wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a shield, a voice of the sea that could drive predators back into the depths. The chamber settled into a steady hum. Atlas relaxed slightly, though his eyes never left Eric. Luna pressed close, her body warm against me, her breathing steady now. For the first time since the storm began, I felt a fragile thread of calm. Eric broke the silence with a bitter laugh. So that's it, you scared them away, you could have made millions. I turned to him slowly, the fury in me tempered not by anger, but by something heavier. You would sell everything for a handful of coins. I would give everything to protect what matters. That's the difference between us. He sneered, but there was no strength in it. Rook looked away, shame flickering across his broad face. Finn muttered something about getting out while we can, his eyes darting toward the tunnel. Even greed had its limits when weighed against survival. Above us, the storm began to break. The pounding of rain softened the thunder, rolling farther out to sea. Through the stone, I felt the vibration of engines, different, this time familiar. Naval ships. The allies my grandfather had once trusted, the guardians, who had been waiting for proof that his work still mattered. When the chamber doors opened to reveal men in uniform, weapons at the ready, Eric's face drained of color. He stumbled back, his protests drowned by the barked orders of sailors who knew the difference between a traitor and a guardian. I stood tall, Atlas at my side, Luna leaning into me, and met the gaze of the officer who stepped forward. His eyes flicked to the consoles, the glowing screen, the hum of the turbines. Keen, he asked. Jonas Keen, I said, my voice steady. The watch is mine now. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Respect, recognition, responsibility, all passed silently in that gesture. Eric was led away in chains, his voice rising in curses that meant nothing against the crash of waves outside. Rook and Finn followed without resistance, their heads bowed, their greed burned out by the storm's lesson. When the chamber finally emptied, silence fell again, not heavy but alive, filled with the steady pulse of the ocean itself. I placed a hand on Atlas's head, felt Luna press against my hip, and let the weight of it all settle into me. I understood now why my grandfather had chosen me. Not because I was perfect, not because I was unbroken, but because I knew the cost of silence, the price of watching, the burden of carrying something bigger than myself. The island was no longer a curse, it was a calling. As dawn broke over Seawolf Ledge, the storm clouds parting to reveal a horizon painted in fire and gold. I stepped outside with Atlas and Luna. The sea stretched endless before us, restless and eternal, and I felt its voice resonate through me like a vow. We were not alone. We were the watch. And whatever storms came next, we would be ready. Looking back now, it's almost impossible to believe that everything began with a so-called worthless rock and 2 dogs, everyone else dismissed as burdens. From the moment I stepped into that lawyer's office, mocked and discarded by my own blood, to the night Atlas clawed at the hearth, and Luna howled against the storm, every step has carried me deeper into a legacy I never asked for but could never turn away from. My grandfather's silent watch wasn't a relic, it was a living promise, a shield meant to guard the seas and all who depend on them. Eric saw only profit, but Atlas and Luna saw the truth long before I did. They led me into the darkness, through stone and storm, to uncover what was hidden not just from the world, but from myself. And when the waves rose high, and betrayal knocked at the door, it wasn't money or power that endured, it was loyalty, purpose, and the bond between a man and his dogs. But even now, with the storm behind us and the watch awakened, I know this story isn't finished. What I drove away into the depths that night may return stronger, hungrier, more dangerous than before. The ocean keeps its secrets, and not all of them are willing to stay buried. So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have sold the secret for riches, or stood guard against the unknown? Leave your thoughts below, share this story if it struck you, and don't forget to subscribe, because what comes Next may shake everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and the sea itself. And trust me, Atlas Luna and I, we're only getting started.